All right, everyone, welcome. Good morning. 6 Design Accessibility Issues and How to Avoid Them. My name is Michaela Lederman, and I'm the Senior Accessibility and QA Lead at Aten Design Group. I am also a certified web accessibility specialist through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Aten Design Group is a full-service digital agency based out of Denver, Colorado. We've been around for more than 24 years and can handle everything from your next website design to ongoing support and everything in between. We provide digital strategy, design, and open source development for mission-driven organizations around the world. We've worked with a number of governmental, higher education, and nonprofit organizations like the ones you see here. We are passionate about partnering with organizations to tell their important story and to do work that matters. Now that I got that spiel out of the way, today we're going to be talking a little bit about accessibility and how it relates to the design world. So let's dive in. So there really are 6 principles I'm kind of mushing together here, so we've kind of like cleaned it up a little bit. There's obviously a lot more that we could talk about, but I think what we're going to go over today is really important for some of the basic guidelines for what you're looking for. For instance, I can't read any of this. Let me make this stuff a little bigger. Your entire site must be responsive. Color must be used wisely and intentionally. This is actually really small. Can any of you read that?
It's fine.
Okay. Just maybe it's small for me over here. Interactive elements should be limited, simple, and easy to use. Content must be highly readable. All forms should include a submit button, and text should accompany all icons. Now, obviously, you can see here, there's a little bit of emphasis on some musts and some shoulds. Those are in relevance to WCAG conformance, the accessibility guidelines, the international guidelines. And basically, if it's a must, you have to do this in order to conform to the guideline that we're referring to. If it's a should, I recommend doing it because there's most likely some developer-heavy pieces that get involved there to make it accessible. However, most people don't really implement it correctly. So we want to make sure that if we can correct it on the design side, then we don't have to rely on a developer as much to make sure that it is working. So first, let's talk about why we should be making our site responsive. This one might seem silly to say because it's 2024, but your design should work across all browsers and all devices. And it should not be dependent on a certain layout for interaction. Your design should work in horizontal and vertical layouts. And users should never have to scroll horizontally to obtain information, even though we know that scrolling is kind of a part of the everyday world. And why is it important? Well, I mentioned it's 2024 and we have a mobile, tablet, laptop, large desktop. We have laptops that are touchscreen. We have everything all over the place, all varying screen sizes and layouts. This should be common practice nowadays, and I'm sure for most of you it is, but it does amaze me how often I still find this as an issue when I'm doing my accessibility audits. And some users require zoom or magnification related assistive technology, which means this isn't appearing how you may have designed it or like your recommended size that you would want. Some users require devices in one fixed layout, which cannot be easily removed or moved around or twisted or anything you need to for your preferred layout. And some users need to actually upload their own CSS files, which will now override your font family, your font choices, your font size, your colors, your background colors, and so on, to make it easy for them to actually read. So your design should be able to adapt easily without any horizontal scrolling, loss of information, or overlapping of content. So who does this tend to impact? Well, it can be everyday mobile users and desktop users. It could be low vision users who require a 200% zoom or require uploading their own CSS to properly see the site. It could be some magnification users who rely, for those who don't know the magnification software, you kind of use the mouse and it has like a little magnification tool and can focus on the area that they're really looking at to zoom in on portions of the site. And physically disabled users with attached fixed layout devices like on their wheelchair or something on an arm. So how to achieve this? I promise there are visuals in this presentation. It's not all text. Never design something that intentionally disables zoom or forces a user into a certain dimension. As we know, obviously I mentioned, some users have that required. It needs to be horizontal or vertical, depending on what kind of assistive technology they are using. We also want to make sure that we're designing layouts for at least 2 common breakpoints, or more if you have the means. But by providing at least 2, the developers can make some educated assumptions on how things should actually flow. At Aten, we tend to work in 3 breakpoints like desktop, tablet, mobile, the usual. I'm sure a lot of you also do that, but it's important to just think about that, to think ahead so that developers know how to implement that correctly. We also want to account for those in-between breakpoints, and this is probably one of the bigger issues why I'm bringing up responsive pieces going on, but we need to provide for direction for those in-between breakpoints. For instance, some people just kind of make their screen a little bit smaller. Maybe they have a massive screen, so their browser's smaller. Maybe they want browsers that are side by side, and so on and so on. They're not the normal breakpoints, and we need to make sure that nothing is overlapping weird, that all of a sudden you do have the scrolling bit going on. Or maybe you have like an overflow hidden and now the content isn't seen and things are being cut off. So you do need to make sure that everything is working at all sizes. So just kind of do that to your browser and make sure it works. And according to WCAG guidelines, design must work up to 200% of the original design and still be completely usable. And that is as simple as just like Command plus on mine, like zoom, zoom, zoom up to 200%. And everything should be flowing. Eventually, it should ideally just be going to like a mobile layout, but this is an issue because I really want to focus on images. So like that's why we focus on SVGs and regular text and not text that is an image, because when you zoom in, it loses quality, which means lots of information, which those with low vision may no longer be able to read that text. So next, let's talk about color in your design. So what does it mean with this very vague sentence of using it wisely and intentionally? I'm referring to 2 important aspects. Colors found in your branding palette must have sufficient contrast of at least a 4.5 to 1 ratio for normal text, for images with text or text over images, a 3 to 1 ratio for large text for all non-text elements that convey important information, so like an icon, for example. And I know that's kind of vague, so like large text, so you have that difference. Large text is actually referred to about 14 point, I like to say around 19 pixels, and bold and larger. Or it can be 24 pixels or larger. It doesn't have to be bold or anything. And it's also important that you keep in mind that if you're designing for something that, oh, it's large text that passed the 3 to 1 ratio on desktop, when it goes down to mobile, it's most likely normal size text. So stick with the normal 4.5 to 1 ratio and you'll be fine on desktop and mobile.
What do you mobile first?
The other way around is fine, exactly. And the other big one with color is that it cannot be the only means of communication, of conveying important information to a user. So why is color important? Why do we need to be using this correctly? Well, 1 in 12 men are actually colorblind, and 1 in 200 women are colorblind. That's a lot of people in our everyday life. My husband and my dad are both colorblind, and one of my best friends. There's a lot of colorblind people could be in this room. We don't know. So we do want to make sure the color is always at top of mind. And screen readers do not announce color or any styling to a user. So if you're emphasizing something with color, or maybe you're highlighting something, that's not being conveyed to a screen reader user. So who does it impact? I basically just said it, but colorblind users, since they may not be able to see the differentiation, could be screen reader users, since they do not get any of the color coding references, and low vision users who may rely on heavier contrast in order to see the site in general. So how do we achieve this? We first want to check our contrast in our preferred design program. Be Figma, Sketch, or Photoshop. Since everyone used probably one of those, I'm assuming, unless there's one I don't really know. Yes, we use Figma. So Stark is one of the more common ones out there. This is one that we leverage as well. And I have a QR code for you all to get the slides for this later too, so if you don't want to take notes or anything. Stark is recommended. There's one for Sketch. There's one for Figma, like I said, we use. But honestly, if you have Figma especially, You can easily just go and find the plugin that works best for you, but I highly recommend including this. Makes your life a lot easier because then you don't have to evaluate your contrast using an external contrast checker tool. There are so many out there. I always recommend the wave.webaim website. It's free. That's kind of why I always recommend it, and it's very easy for people to use. But all you would have to do is, obviously, you take the colors that you're working with, and there's an eyedropper tool, so you can go to your file if you need to. And you can see that we have these little bars here, so you can obviously change it if you need to get the right ratio. But we have a large text. This will focus on the icon, and the border of the input is important. That also needs to have, unless it's the native default, which but obviously you can follow the a normal or large. That's ideal. Next, we want to make sure that we check contrast of brand colors and combinations and tweak this where necessary. Again, there are tons of options out there. I'll just put the link up to whatever this one is. So this one, you put in the 6 colors that you're working with, and what it will do, it will show you the various combinations that you can work with. You can see like the black with the bright blue works, and the black with the light works, and you can see it gives you all the combinations that pass the 4.5 to 1 for normal text. Many times we will do this and we'll show the client, we'll say, hey, I'm sorry, but none of your colors work. However, when we put it into this tool, we're able to tweak it ever so slightly to make it pass all the guidelines. And a majority of the time, they're fine with that because to the naked eye, you're not going to notice the difference between those two blues. But we can know that it passes the normal size text, and we can guarantee that it is accessible for users. So highly recommend, if you do come across that a lot, just tweak what you can or find something that ends up working. You want to make sure that you check images of text or text over images or text over overlays for contrast manually, because automated tools cannot catch this. So you have to do this manually. If you are someone that you love the big imagery and you love the text over it on your websites, you need to be checking this manually. So another option, I have that WebAIM one back up, and I have one of our websites, don't know what this is, Natural History Museum of Utah. And all that it is you have a large white text, and just find a bunch of colors right near the text. Make sure it passes, obviously, with large text and the normal text. And I'd say, like, you may not get it to be 100% everywhere, but as long as the majority of the colors behind the text passes, you are good in that sense. And that's always a good one. And another tip as well, I always do a worst case scenario. So if it's white text over an image, we always have like some kind of gradient. Just get rid of the image and just have a white background. If it's going to pass on that, that's going to be the worst case scenario. Then you know no matter what image is there, it will be fine. You need to ensure that your interactive states are also accessible. So that's your hover, your keyboard focus, your visited links. That one's always annoying because people forget, and it's default purple and then it's the whole thing. But you need to make sure that those also pass guidelines. So just make sure you're accounting for those in your design process. So we can see we have like, there is a clickable link or heading with the hover hand that you can see it's over there and how that's supposed to be interacting. You can see there's a column for hover and focus. You just need to make sure that you're counting that, because otherwise you're leaving it up to the developers, and sometimes it may be missed in the QA process and stuff. So making sure you're accounting for it helps. Another big one I see a lot is when someone uses opacity as the hover action. This happens very often. Automated tools will not pick this up because it's still the same color. It does not regulate or does not render the opacity in the automated tools. So you have to manually make sure that if you're using opacity, that you are doing that new color that it turns to, or just don't use it. Include text, borders, icons, tables, or alternative text or alternative ways of displaying content when necessary. And this is important because it doesn't always help just one person, but some people just may be more visual and the color is really what they're looking for. Other people are more analytical, so maybe a table that goes with the graph just makes more sense. Just gives users a way to digest the information that works best for them. So for instance, I see like alerts all the time that will pop up on a website, and a lot of times they're just color coded, like green, you did a good job, success, or red's like, we are closed today, there is a snowstorm, but someone may not recognize it if it's red because if they can't see it, they're not going to know that it's a high alert. So by using like icons, especially text, because that's one of the things we're going to talk about with icons and text, that way, no matter if they can see the color or not, they're going to get that severity. Another one we see a lot as well is like the active state on a main navigation, where someone may just highlight the active page that you're on. So this one I think is the About page. Keep in mind I'm using Aten a lot, and I'm just playing with it in the inspector tool, so that I could have a worst case scenario for you all to look at. So for instance, I made this yellow. So they're like, okay, cool. Most of us could probably see it. However, some people can't. So by making sure you're including like a border or an icon or something of that sort, even bolding something versus normal text is enough of a difference to be able to say that this is active and that it isn't relying on color alone. I also see things like graphs a lot. So this one is just really ridiculous. Circle graph, but it's color coded. But if someone can't tell the difference between the, you know what they are, the dogs and the rabbits, which are blue and purple, they're not going to understand that content. So just by including that same kind of information in a table format, people can digest it as quickly as possible. And design with the intent of black and white as like your worst case scenario. Can you still understand all content and functionality on the page? One thing we do using Figma is they actually have this vision simulator tool. So you can actually go to like a low contrast, a grayscale, a red deficiency, a blue deficiency, a yellow deficiency, and you can see how your design actually changes based on the simulation that you're working with color blindness. So it's always good to take a look at that, but again, the grayscale is very important. And just remember, if a user cannot see it, they cannot interact with it or get the information from the element. Contrast applies to anything that conveys important information. Could be headings and other text, could be images of text or text over images, and all interactive elements. If you want someone to touch it with their finger or a mouse, it needs to pass contrast. So this is links and buttons, form inputs, and social icon links, and obviously there's so many more, I'm not going to go through all of them. So next, let's talk about interactive elements. These should be limited, simple, and easy to use. So what does it mean when I'm talking about interactive elements? It means that elements and components must be easy to use via mouse, keyboard, screen reader, and touch. Do not include too many moving or interactive elements on a page, like changing the scrolling speed, which I see all the time, or having too much parallax. Not sure if that's relevant anymore, but too much parallax on a page can give actually like major distractions for users and even some nausea impairments as well. Do not require animations to complete a task, especially hover. Hover doesn't exist everywhere. Don't require it. Interactive elements should be intuitive and appear intuitive. You should not require instructions for interacting with components. And videos, carousels, and slideshows should be accessible. So why is it important? Well, all websites must also work with assistive technology out of the box. It is illegal to have a separate website that is better suited for assistive technology. And more importantly, you cannot rely on accessibility widgets because those will not help you. That is a whole other rant I can go into after this if you want to listen, but those accessibility widgets will not help you. Your site should work out of the box. And assistive technology users have expected patterns for the interactions. So everything you create has to fall in line with that. But if you don't know what those expected patterns are, it's going to be kind of a pain. Hover doesn't exist on touchscreen. Hover doesn't exist for keyboard users. Hover doesn't exist for screen readers. So don't overcomplicate your design by hiding information. And people won't interact with elements that don't look interactive. It's pretty common knowledge there. We don't want users accidentally pressing or clicking the wrong links or buttons. If anyone has my issue, I'm doing that on my phone all the time. So just make sure it works for my fat thumbs as well. Not all users can perform swipe gestures, so we need to make sure it's simple and we have alternatives there. And screen readers can be overpowered by autoplay videos if sound is included. Just think about it. If a screen reader uses sound to navigate, and the video is playing when they get to the site and it has sound, they no longer can hear what's happening on the site because all they can hear is the video that is playing. So we just need to make sure we're not having the video play on autoplay. And the movement of autoplay videos and carousels can be extremely distracting for some users. So who does it impact? Went over some of these before, but screen reader users and low vision users and keyboard only users who rely only on key presses to interact with the element. Could be users with ADHD and ADD who get distracted by too much movement and animations. It could be users with mobility impairments who cannot perform any kind of double taps or swipe gesture or even like something at the top of their phone that might be pretty hard for someone to reach easily. Could be users with tremors who may need those large touch areas to actually hit the right target. Could be users with cognitive impairments who may not understand how to interact with an element found in front of them. Could be users with vertigo and inner ear disorders if movements are moving too much or scrolling at weird speeds that can really throw them off. And users on touch devices like a phone, a tablet, or even the touch laptops. We just need to make sure that target area is good. So how do we actually achieve this? How do we make sure that your interactions are accessible? Touch size of interactive elements, not inline body text, I feel like that was important to put in there, should be well spaced. They have to be 24 by 24 pixels according to WCAG. So, and that's the newest WCAG 2.2 AA update. It used to be 44. So obviously all that it's doing and trying to say is obviously instead of just having a little tiny radio button, we want the whole area clickable. Instead of just a tiny little arrow, we want the whole thing clickable. We just want to make it easier for a user to interact. So here is a direct, this is straight from the WCAG compliance website. There's a whole other one that tells you how to use it all. But this is a good one. The 44 by 44 pixel is the AAA guideline. That is what used to be the only recommendation. But since I think it came out last October, the 24 by 24 pixel is fine. That doesn't necessarily mean that your icon needs to be that big, just that the touch area will have to be that big. So it could include the padding around the icon, like that second line. Or in the third line, it also includes the margin surrounding it as well. So that gives the space that it needs. Obviously, anything less than that is just going to fail. So you need to make sure you're at least doing the 24 by 24. And of course, simplifying everything that you have. So like in an instance like this, and I've been on apps and websites that they try to put as many options like as a first click right away. But like if I want to add a new note over here on the right, I could accidentally hit the delete button, and that's the complete opposite of what I would be wanting to do. So obviously simplifying, maybe using your analytics to find which ones are actually necessary, and then a menu to get those secondary options is always important. Never use hover to show more information. Always show the information without an interaction, or it must be shown on a click instead of hover for things like tooltips, CTAs, and navigation drop-downs. I have this really aggressive flipping animation that I found on CodePen, and obviously we have to hover on it, and then it's like has this kind of nauseating animation, and you had to hover to get the information about what the image is and to get the link to get more information about it. So it's kind of important. We obviously don't want to hide that. If you're going to use an animation, try to use something like more of a micro animation just to reinforce that it's interactive. So by simply just having this, it's just like growing the image slightly. It's nothing too overpowering. If someone turns off their animations on their website, it works still. And obviously for phone and touch devices, it's not going to impair how that's being used. Use a flat navigation strategy if you are using any kind of menu navigation with a drop-down to ensure the usability works for mouse, keyboard, screen reader, and touch. For example, this is the city of Oxnard that we have here. Their website there's so many links because everybody's going there for everything. So what it is, everything has a drop down. So obviously, maybe we do want some overview pages, like this example has government overview. What we do is that overview page just comes within the drop downs. Most of the time, they actually don't want that overview page if those important elements are in the drop down anyway. And then this way, it's working for touch, it's working for keyboard, no matter what it is, it's the same interaction throughout. However, sometimes clients don't like that, and I get that. So we offer an idea for like split navigation. Now I'm using a keyboard navigation here because it was the best way to show it. where news and events, for example, is still a landing page, but the arrow itself is still also a drop down. So a keyboard user can interact with it that way. You don't have to worry about weird double clicks and no weird hovers. People can just easily either click where they want to go or the drop down to get more information there. You also want to make sure that you always include pause buttons on autoplay videos and autoplay carousels and slideshows. Even for background videos that you may be having in like your hero image, because I know like a lot of people do that, the movement can be very distracting and cause major distress for some users. So really, it's as simple as just a nice little pause button wherever you think is easy to go. Obviously, if someone's using keyboard, they have a keyboard to get where they need to go. Someone who has who's using a mouse can easily find it. If they're using a screen reader, they can still easily find it as long as it's obviously accessible. And that goes for slideshows. This was supposed to show you a slideshow, but I guess I took a screenshot and not a GIF. So same thing. See as well, but there's still a little pause, even though it's a slideshow, like an automated one that's going on, so someone can turn it off. And this also goes if someone has a reduced motion set on their phone, it automatically pauses these if you set it up that way. That's the developer side. Do not include any sound with videos or autoplay. Obviously, I mentioned it before. Just make sure it's muted if you need that sound. Just have it muted on load, and then obviously you can have the sound play after. You want to make sure that you include alternatives to swipe gestures, since not everyone has the mobility to do those. Ensure it works with basic clicks as well. This includes slideshows on mobile. Don't get rid of the navigation buttons that you have. Some people can't slide through. They can't really hit the pager very well. Like, just make it large and make sure that they are still there. I love Drupal always had this where you have your drag and drop, but then you can easily just go to the show row weights, and they always give you that option to be able to reorganize with that order. So obviously, like, that's just showing that it has a great option for those that can't do the drag and drop. And finally, make all interactive elements up here interactive. Links should look like links, buttons should look like buttons. Drop-down buttons should tell a user that it's going to drop down. An accordion should look like it's going to pop down. A modal should look like it's probably going to pop up. You just have to give them that expected interaction. So it's as simple as, like, here we just have a navigation where some are drop-downs, and that where we work is a direct link, and there's a clear differentiation between those different buttons so that you know that these ones are going to be drop-downs and this one is not. Next, we need to make sure that content must be highly readable. This one actually has like a lot to go over. I actually have a whole other presentation just on accessible content. If you're ever interested in that, I can send you all that information. But for you, I'm hoping, like I said, most of you are designers, so a lot of this was already just like common best practice and things you've already done. So hopefully you don't have to worry about that. So what does it mean exactly when I talk about content must be highly readable? You must use correct font choices for certain content to help with readability, since fonts are just difficult to read at smaller sizes. Avoid certain alignments of text, as certain alignments can actually be very difficult to read with lots of text. Embrace ideal line lengths and spacing for ease of readability. Enable users to quickly scan content and obtain necessary information by breaking up large blocks of text and using clear and concise headings or clear and concise, clear and consistent verbiage by using correct heading structure, having descriptive links, and so on. Create a clear hierarchy of content on the page by using correct heading structure and emphasizing importance based on the location of the page. So, like, obviously higher up is a higher important than something that's further down. And create a logical flow that guides a user through the content from top to bottom, left to right, and straight from top to bottom, kind of like a mobile view for those who rely on assistive technology like a screen reader. So why is it important? Well, users should be able to quickly scan content and obtain necessary information by just visually jumping around, heading to heading to find what they're looking for, like many visual users are going to do, or structurally, like a screen reader who navigates the site by semantic elements. So similar to how we're going to look for the heading that we want to actually read about, and then we find the content within that, the screen reader is going to look at all the heading 2s on the page. Once they find the heading 2 that's relevant to them, they look for the heading 3 that may make the most sense. And then they'll look within that heading 3 and see if there are heading 4s that makes sense. If not, then they go back to that heading 3 and find all the content or links that are necessary for them. So that's why it's very important to make sure you're doing your hierarchy correctly. And if something is difficult to read or follow, users will just lose interest. And visual flow and order should match keyboard and screen reader order at the same time. Remember that many screen reader users cannot see the screen. They rely solely on how it is written in the code without any form of styling. So if you're having your side navigation on the right-hand side, but you're going from like the banner to side navigation to the content, that can be kind of confusing for a screen reader user who's doing that, or because screen reader users are not all non-visual. Some are visual users who may just require a screen reader because the keyboard doesn't give them the content they need or the access they need, or it could be someone who needs to hear and see what they're reading at the same time to digest it. So if they're expecting to go to the main content next, but you brought them over to the side navigation, that's a very confusing opportunity for them to read your content. It would be very confusing. Correct hierarchy and structure just helps boost SEO and Google rankings. There's not much more I can say about that. Making sure it's descriptive and highly readable is great. So who does it impact? Could be screen reader users who only hear content in the order it is created on the page. Low vision or obstructed vision users who rely on a strong visual hierarchy. Dyslexic users who have difficulties reading certain fonts. Fun fact, Comic Sans is a great font for those who have dyslexia. Users with cognitive impairments who need a simple, intuitive flow to follow with little distraction. Users who have English as a second language, who need a clear, descriptive language to actually understand the content. Or just users who are in a hurry, who are just looking for one specific element on the page to get their info and to get out. So how do we achieve this? We want to make sure that we stick with left-aligned text for most content. Avoid justified text altogether. Avoid center text for more than like 3 lines of text, and avoid right-aligned text when possible. I know a lot of people use it for like captions on images, for example. So I just have a basic piece going on here. So we just have left align, right align, center. Obviously, center becomes a little bit more difficult to read, and obviously justify, the biggest part of the river that can end up going in there, can be very distracting, and it's just not following the usual reading order and the easy breaks. So we just need to make sure, stick with left as a default. You also need to make sure that your line length should not exceed 80 characters per line. It needs to be a minimum of 40 characters per line. These are the WCAG recommendations. I have an example here that shows, like, obviously the 50 to 75 is kind of a sweet spot. There are some instances, especially I know in the design world, sometimes 80 characters just seems kind of short. So I'm always okay with kind of pushing it to like 90, maybe 100 at max, but like we don't need that body text to go like 19, 20 pixels wide. Like that's just like absurd. So you need to make sure you're doing that, and don't make it too small either. Just kind of maybe have the 50 as the lowest piece there. Font size must not be smaller than 12 pixels. That will be called in any automated tooling. Line height must be at least 1.5 times the font size. Space following the paragraph must be 1.5 times the line height. That's kind of, you don't probably know that you're doing this, but if you're a great designer, you're probably following that already just based on readability. You want to make sure you're using descriptive headings to break up content. So for instance, if I have all this content on the left side, but I am looking for something about a rentals.com and livelovely.com partnership, I end up having to read all this content to find what's going on. Rather, if we were using headings to break up the content, it becomes much easier to find what we're looking for. So one thing we do to help content creators actually follow correct heading semantics, because if anyone works with clients, I'm sure you've heard like, well, this heading's too big, so I don't want to use it, so I want to use the heading 4 or heading 5. So what we do at Aten a lot of times, as you can see, we have different variations. So the headings free. So there's like a bold, a regular, and a stylized version. And many times we'll also give different like sizes as well. There's like a heading 2 large and a heading 2 smaller. So at least we're giving them that ability, and there's still some consistency throughout the design for what they're working with, so that they're not making their own styles, which is when things kind of go awry. We want to make sure that we're avoiding vague links like learn more, click here, read more, etc. I had to fake this on our website, of course. I'm going to call it out every time. So I added some learn more links to each one of these. I think it's from our work page. And honestly, the learn more stuff or the read more is a little bit starting to get outdated when it comes to CTAs. And it's not great for SEO because they're not descriptive, so they're not going to weigh you higher. So having clear descriptive links will actually bring your designs to the next level, I think. But from a screen reader perspective, I did want to show you what that was. And so I'm on VoiceOver on my Mac, and I didn't want anyone to listen to a screen reader today because it is extremely overwhelming. So I took a screenshot of the visual aspect that you can also have going at the same time. And you can see here, we have learn more, learn more, learn more. And on the visual side, by scanning only the links on the page, we are highlighting all of the learn more links. So if a user is navigating by a screen reader and they're hearing link learn more, link learn more, link learn more, then they say, okay, well, what do I want to learn more about? Let me click on this one. Let me find a relevant heading that's related to it. Oh, that's not the right one. Now I have to go back, find what I'm looking for, and go from there. Ideally, you could even just have the headings of your CTA be the link itself. It's descriptive. It's already good for SEO. You're good there. And when we look at it from a screen reader perspective, we can already see that the links there are descriptive, and a user can get to exactly what they want. An important note is that if you have a descriptive link, like this one, order ahead, and you have multiple of them on the page, they are no longer descriptive. They are now vague, because now you'll hear link, order ahead, link, order ahead, link, order ahead. And you're like, what am I ordering ahead about? Go from there. There are ways around this from a developer standpoint, using ARIA label by and ARIA label, but there's other stuff going on there. I can have another webinar on ARIA because most likely everybody's doing it wrong. So unless you are well versed in that, I would just try to keep them pretty descriptive overall. Underlines must be reserved for links only. It's the universal sign for a link. Just don't use it in the other instance, please. Appreciate it. Avoid decorative font choices for body text. I went with a very aggressive design that no one would probably ever do, but to really emphasize the point that obviously you're going to use a cursive or a decorative font, make sure it's big, it's highly readable, and there are only a couple words. This also goes for serif fonts as well, with the ones that have the big difference between the different weights of, like, the serif might be like really thick, but like the vertical line is really thin, but then the horizontal ones are heavy. That is also very difficult to read. That's starting to become decorative. So there's a reason why we tend to use these very boring fonts as body fonts. Let's stick with that. And finally, create a clear hierarchy and system throughout your design. Just making sure if you are creating a great system, the clients are going to start using a good system, or your managers or whoever you're working with, they're going to be able to make the right choice if you set them up for the right choice. Controversial one, all forms should include a submit button. So what does it mean? Some kind of submit button should be available via mouse, keyboard, and touch for all form elements. This is relevant to anything that requires a text input, a radio button, checkboxes, select dropdown, and so on. All forms throughout your design should not change upon text input or input selection. So meaning, like, you shouldn't be clicking, like, choosing your option in a select dropdown, and then all of a sudden everything on the page changes. You should be incorporating a button there. So why is it important? Because screen reader users must be alerted if content has changed. Just because it has changed visually to you, has it actually been done programmatically? Has it been announced to the screen reader that new content is on the page? And users may accidentally choose the wrong option. And if they choose it and it automatically changes context or it submits the form, then this could be super problematic for someone who didn't mean to do it. Maybe it's like a really bad thing that they've clicked on that could, like, change something else. So we want to make sure that it works for everybody, whether they are visual, screen reader, keyboard, or anything. And according to WCAG, interacting with a component cannot automatically cause a change of context. So basically, one element should only perform one action at a time. I mentioned that before. You shouldn't be choosing, like, a select option and then it, like, submits as well. Again, there are ways around that and they have little caveats, but as a general rule of thumb, that's always great. So who does it impact? Screen reader users for proper announcements of change. Keyboard only users ensuring interactivity. Users with tremors who may choose items accidentally. And users with cognitive impairments who may be confused or disoriented if there is no button or experience an unexpected interaction. So how do we achieve this? Well, just include a submit button for all forms, no matter how small. And submit forms with a page refresh rather than Ajax or JavaScript. Unless your developers probably know how to use ARIA and ARIA Live and how to implement the JavaScript submission correctly, my guess is they probably don't. No offense, I also didn't know for a very long time. So for now, just stick with the page refresh. It automatically tells the screen reader that something has been submitted. There's no confusion. It works as expected. It's easy and guaranteed to send the correct announcements to screen reader users. So stick with that. So here, I just have a basic form, and we have a search button. And it doesn't really matter what your options are if you have a regular search or you have this. Like, you can't just use keyboard enter key because not everyone has that keyboard enter key to work from. So you have to make sure that there's always a button. And finally, text should accompany all icons, another controversial one. But what does it mean when I'm saying that text needs to accompany all icons? Well, icons cannot be the only means of conveying or labeling information. So it's important to use icons to enhance text, or maybe you're just breaking up a lot of content on a page. You shouldn't be using text to enhance the icon. This way, all users can understand the context. It seems pretty straightforward, but like I said, it's still a very controversial topic overall. But why is it important? Well, we should not be forcing any users to learn your icons. Many apps, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called, or products and sites that users repeatedly use can actually get away with it because people come back to learn more. Majority of websites, people are not coming to hour after hour and day after day. They probably come in like once a month to get the event information or get anything that's happening there. And there's actually been some UX studies that have shown that people don't always recognize the icon. They recognize the placement of where the icon lives. So you can change the icon as many times as you want, but you can just know where you have to go. So they're not actually remembering the icon. They just have muscle memory for where it lives. And icons can have multiple meanings to many users, depending on the context of the site, or this can be depending on the language or cultural or geographic location. And icons need to make sense to all types of assistive technology. So icons should also be available to screen reader users as well if they're conveying important information. And visual meaning and programmatic meaning should match exactly. As I mentioned before, not all screen reader users are non-visual. Many are looking at it and listening at the same time. So if they don't really match up, it's a very confusing experience. And WCAG states that headings, labels, and links should be descriptive. So if your icon is being used for any of those, then it does not satisfy that need. So again, I've talked about, icons are always funny. These are some of the instances of universal icons and are universal in meaning. Like these ones, but as a whole, these types of icons are super rare. For example, we know that the house is going to mean the home button. If you try to put something else there, people probably won't know what's going on there. Universal icons are standard and generally accepted. They are immediately recognizable. And you're probably looking at this and being like, there's like 4 there. I can think probably the Hamburg menu or the this or the that. Well, the mobile menu button already has so many options. This is just Googling like a couple different ones that we have here. And I've seen all of them. And some of them, like this one, I've seen as a list. And this one I've seen as showing grid view. And this one I've seen as like a settings and so on and so on. There's so many instances in double meanings that it's still not universal. Yes?
What about next? Well, not literally next. Okay. There was an example of like multiplication. That seems pretty.
It is. I think you can get away with it. The X being used for a universal icon because it's most likely related to clothes. I would say that it's not considered a universal icon if you like look it up. I think Nielsen Norman is like who I get a lot of that information from. It can be used as like delete as well, which is kind of the same thing. but at the same time, it still has a conflicting icon and a double meaning. But I'm not going to hate you if you use it. We use it. It is like, for your audience, is most likely fine. But of course, if you want to include some text, that's always better. Another issue is that we have conflicting icons that we see a lot. So like the like column, I've seen the thumbs up, the heart, but I've also seen a star. But then also sometimes that heart can mean to like favorite it and it's adding to like a favorites folder, or the star's doing the same thing, or like the big one that I have here is like the share icon. There are so many share icons out there. So you should, if you're going to be using a share icon, you want to share it, you need to be including the text along with it, because I've seen all of these, but then sometimes I've seen this one is like external link. So it's kind of important to make sure that you're using it consistently and making sure you're including some text with your icons. So who does it actually impact? Screen reader users and low vision users and visual users who use screen readers. Does the screen reader announce what the user is seeing? Do they match? Do they make sense? Users with cognitive impairments who may not be able to translate custom iconography easily. Users from a different region, country, socioeconomic status, and so on. Similar to how words and phrases change depending on the region, icons can fall in line with that too, which means one thing to you could be different to someone else. And just new users to your site. If it's confusing to the user, they're probably not going to be staying.
I just have a question about the juxtaposition of an icon. Or what's your recommendation for if you have an icon, do not have an alt tag associated with it, so you don't have like a double reading of that?
Yes. So there's different things like, if you have an icon, should you have the alternative text or no alternative text to go with it to avoid the double reading? It really depends on the situation. There are many times, if you're using SVG, it doesn't technically use alt text. You have to include a title, which most people don't include the title that goes along with the SVG. So that's, again, a whole thing. So unless it's conveying like, yeah, so if you're using like the location button to say like, here, this is the location, or a phone icon to say, here's your phone number, that's kind of using it as a label. So you should end up either using visually hidden text, your title, or labeling it, but you can hide it to just a screen reader using ARIA hidden if you have that text that goes along with it. Or you can use pseudo element, you can use all these different things. But I would try to avoid the double meaning in some way, but you do have to make sure that there is visual with the non-visual. Does that make sense? So how do we achieve this? Well, label your icons that are used to convey critical information. That's the most important part here. If your icon is just there for decoration, it's kind of in that same way with like, you don't have to include, or you have to include empty alt text. It's that same thing. If it's just there for decoration, don't worry about it. If it's there to do critical information, definitely label it. Label your icons that are users' links. So if you have like social media, for example, it should definitely be labeled. Some of those are okay because they're so, again, this one's it's kind of funny, but there's instances for all of them. Icons used as labels should match the programmatic label of the icon. This is the more important one that you want to just make sure that what they're visually seeing and what they're hearing align. So overall, just label your icons. And I mentioned we love the use of icons. We use them all the time. However, we are doing this. So like this is City of Oxnard. They have lots of different languages and their constituents, multilingual all over the place, which is great. So using the icons with the text is a great way to just emphasize like, oh, I don't know what waste collection is, but that looks like a trash can. Maybe waste means trash, and it kind of emphasizes what's going on there. However, it's not reliant on the icon itself. And that's it. It actually went faster than I thought it would be, which is great. If you guys are ever interested, we do lunch hour webinars every Wednesday. It's Mountain Time, which was great when I lived in Denver, but now that I'm East Coast, it's a little bit different. But I talk pretty often, actually. However, there are a lot of developer heavy. There are a lot of design heavy. There's a lot of accessibility heavy, a lot of those. That's kind of my jam, I guess. I do have a number of past related webinars that could be relevant to all of you. There are obviously some other ones out there. Like I mentioned, I just did a couple ARIA related ones that I think are really helpful. Especially I did one with one of our full stack developers, and it was more developer heavy rather than like accessibility, why you need to do it. It was a combo. That one's not listed here because when we think about the developer world, but you can easily find it on the website aten.io. If you're looking for some accessibility resources, I have this here. There are some on the website. It will show you where you need to go. I mentioned that I also have. Oh wait, I see a couple people with the phone out. I also have these slides available, which I'll put right here. Please let me know if it works or doesn't work. I'm pretty sure I shared it correctly because I'm using Google Slides, but obviously if I need to change the permissions, I would love to be able to do that. But like I said, access to the slides if you have them or want them or need them. And that's it. I hope everyone learned a little something today. Maybe.
That didn't. Can I ask you a question about icons and components? In particular, we're trying to make our accordions accessible. And the little plus icon that makes the accordion open that changes to a minus, close it.
Yep.
We're struggling with that one.
From a design perspective, development, or both?
Development, our designers don't worry that much about like accessibility, so it's really a development
Okay.
at that level, right?
Yeah.
So they know the behavior they want. But any thoughts on?
With an accordion, the plus minus is fine. The dropped it or the little caret or whatever is fine. I mean, anything that's kind of conveying that it's going to like do something. It's kind of the important piece. And I feel like an accordion is a pretty normal. Again, it's not universal, but since you can use an arrow, you can use a plus, you can use a different type of arrow. I think the more important thing is as long as it visually like looks like you can click it, that's more important. And then from a developer standpoint, I'm going to try to, I want to show you, I have a good website of some great recommendations from a developer standpoint that you can go to that have like some basic accessible patterns so that way you know that you're doing an accordion correctly, you're including the correct aria.
Okay, that's what I will go Google myself.
Yeah, and
that's what I need to.
I'm all thrown up. I will just undo this and then maybe